We now have several autopsies done on the body of Michael Brown, and there's even a third one ordered. The Federal Justice Department has ordered a third autopsy. The first two autopsies were from the county of St. Louis. Now, that was not released for a long, long time until a private one was released. That private one was commissioned by the Brown family. Now, funny enough, right after that autopsy was released, all of a sudden we have leaks about what the county of St. Louis autopsy also said. Now, we'll get to that in a little bit because they want to present a different point of view. I'll give both of them to you. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at the pictures here of the autopsy, and it shows you that there are at least 6 bullet wounds. In fact, County of St. Louis says there might be up to 8. But let's go with the number 6 that most people agree to, including Dr. Michael Baden, who did the private autopsy. And 4 of them entered his right arm, as you can see there, and 2 of the bullets entered his head. And so now let's go to Dr. Baden, who, by the way, is one of the most respected medical examiners in the country. He ran New York's medical examiner department, and he also did autopsies on Dr. Martin Luther King and JFK. He's 80 years old. He says, first of all, people have been asking how many times was he shot. This information could have been released on day 1. And he points out that there's really nothing you learn from the autopsy that would in any way jeopardize anyone's security. They're just simple information. And you'll see that the information is a little complicated, a little nuanced. So it doesn't necessarily point in a very specific direction. It doesn't tell you the whole story. And he says, of course you could have shared this information. They just chose not to. So now Baden told the New York Times that Brown was also shot 4 times in the right arm, and that all the bullets were fired into his front. So that's important, because one witness, Dorian Johnson, had said that at one point Michael Brown got shot in the back, then turned around. The autopsy does not support that. He was not shot in the back at all. All the bullets entered from the front. Okay, then New York Times explains further. The bullets did not appear to have come from very close range because there was no gunpowder on his body. Now, that's really interesting. Now, they haven't tested his clothes yet, at least a private autopsy didn't, and so they don't know if there's any gun residue on his clothes, but as far as his person is considered, there was no gunpowder, so no question he was shot from a distance. There is a question as to how much that distance was. So we'll get to that in a second as well. New York Times explains the last 2 shots were in the head, and they would have stopped him in his tracks and were likely the last fired. And that makes sense. Now, they explain further, one of the bullets shattered Mr. Brown's right eye, traveled through his face, exited through his jaw, and re-entered his collarbone. Now, that sounds weird. The reason that that might have happened is because, by all accounts, as you're going to see here, Michael Brown's head was down in the last shot, so it went through his head and then re-entered his body. Okay? Now, we go back to Dr. Baden. He says, in my capacity as the forensic examiner of the New York State Police, I would say you're not supposed to shoot so many times. Right now, there's too little information to forensically reconstruct the shooting. So, as a general thing, did he need to be shot 6 times? Based on his vast experience, he doesn't think so, but the whole reconstruction of the crime scene is not over yet. So he says, look, this one here, he points to, looks like his head was bent downward, talking about the last shot that was fired. It can be because he's giving up or because he's charging forward at the officer. Now, some people are coming forward representing the family on local talk stations. A woman named Josie came forward. Now, we don't know who she is. The radio station says she's a friend of the officer's wife. Is that true? Okay, let's assume that the radio station checked that and double-checked it and got it right. Now, again, this is the officer's wife's friend. I mean, you want to talk about hearsay. But she says that the officer thought that Brown was charging at him, and that's why he had to fire all those shots. So that last shot, it's unclear whether, again, as Dr. Baden rightfully points out, whether he was giving up and hence went like this and got shot in the head anyway, or if he was charging at the officer. I don't know that we'll have more evidence on that, but right now, that's how things stand. Now, a lot of people could rightfully argue maybe you shouldn't have shot him in the head twice under any of those circumstances. So now, Dr. Baden on the distance says the muzzle of the gun was at least 1 to 2 feet away, but it could have been 30 feet away. we'll get back to that in a second because we already have evidence on that, and it's actually provided by the cops. So if it's 1 to 2 feet away, it supports the cops' version of events if we believe the hearsay from friend of the family. Oh my God, he's coming at me. I already shot him a bunch of times. Now I can't do anything but shoot him in the head, right? If he's 30, 35 feet away, well, there's a lot of other options you might have had, right? So now we go to the St. Louis County autopsy. They say, according to the autopsy performed by the St. Louis Medical Examiner, Michael Brown was shot between 6 and 8 times from the front and had marijuana in his system at the time of his shooting. Okay, here we go. So when they knew that he was shot all those times, St. Louis County did not release that. First, they released the footage of, the cops did, of Michael Brown at the convenience store bullying the store owner, right? And taking the those cigarellos or whatever they're called and actually pushing the guy too. But they didn't release how many times he was shot or that he was shot in the head. Now that the other autopsy's out, there's 2 important corrections, right? One is actually he was shot more times than the private autopsy says. Okay. And the second correction is what some are describing as a bombshell. He had marijuana in his system. All right. Here we go. THC, which is active ingredient in marijuana, can stay in a person's body for upward of 40 days, according to the National Drug Court Institute. The fact that he had any THC in his system does not mean that he was high at the time, okay? Could have been easily 2-4 days ago that he smoked pot, or it could have been 40 days ago that he smoked it. It stays in your system a long time, especially if you're a frequent user. We don't know if he was a frequent user or not. But even if you're an infrequent user, it stays in your system for about 4 days. So it really proves absolutely nothing other than the fact that Michael Brown, some point in the last 40 days, smoked marijuana, which would put him in the same category as almost everyone in college. So I don't think that they would want 70% of college kids executed by getting shot in the head because they had marijuana in their system. I hope not, at least. Okay, now, if he was high at the time, though, what would that effect have been? Well, for that, we go to Richard Nixon and his White House. Really? Yes. Actually, back in 1972, they commissioned a study, and here's what it said about marijuana. Rather than inducing violent or aggressive behavior, marijuana was usually found to inhibit the expression of aggressive impulses by pacifying the user, generally producing states of drowsiness, lethargy, timidity, and passivity. So, no. In case you haven't caught on to all the research coming out over the last 4 decades, marijuana doesn't put you in a wild rage. If anything, it calms you down. Okay, so put that nonsense aside. And of course, what they want to do, and the reason now conveniently St. Louis finally releases their autopsy, is more character assassination. You see him in that store, the marijuana, THC, that sounds so dangerous. Okay, now, finally, onto the distance. Now, defenders of the cops will say, he could have been rushing him, and you don't know, and there's some witnesses who say that he was rushing at him, and what could the cops do? He was so close, he was almost... Well, first of all, I thought you were saying there was a struggle for the gun earlier. So now you're saying, okay, well, that subsided, and clearly, according to every account, Michael Brown ran away. And then after he runs away, he clearly turns around because he's shot in the front, right? And he turns around before he gets shot in the... There is no shooting in the back, okay? So let's be clear about all those facts. Okay. Now, there's clearly not a struggle for the gun at that point because he's significantly far away. You can say, oh, no, it could have been 1 to 2 feet. So let's go to the people who you are defending, the cops, right? St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmar did say Brown was hit multiple times and died about 35 feet from the police car where the confrontation occurred. Now, he said that right in the beginning. So that was part of why people were like, whoa, why did you shoot the guy when he's so far away? Now, he says 35 feet from the police car, but the officer was fairly close to the car when he did the shooting of Michael Brown. So it appears that there was some good distance between Michael Brown and the officer, leaving the officer with a lot more options rather than just shooting the guy 6 to 8 times overall and twice in the head. So those are the facts as we know them now. So let's go to video to finish up the evidence that we have here, and it comes from Piaget Crenshaw. And she's a neighbor of Michael Brown. She was in the area. She saw the shooting. She started taping approximately 30 seconds after the shooting because she saw it, she was shell-shocked, then she went downstairs to get a camera and came back up and started taping, and here's her video.
Police shot this boy outside my apartment. They killed him.
He didn't have to do anything like that. He didn't have no gun.
Now you see here some witnesses in the background. You see her reaction. Remember, she saw it, then she went and got the camera after the shooting had already taken place and taped what you just saw there. And then she was on CNN. They asked her, why'd you go get the camera? Let's take a look.
From it all initially happening, I knew this was not right. I knew the police shouldn't have even been chasing this young boy and firing at the same time. And the fact that he got shot in his face, it was something that clicked in me like, no, somebody else needs to see this. This isn't right. I got to record.
Now, her story matches up with a lot of the other witnesses that say that they were shocked to see at the time, as it was happening, that he got shot in the face. Now, if he was, according to family friends of the police officer, bum rushing the officer, and he's almost at the officer, would they have been shocked that he got shot? Maybe, but probably not, right? So these are all interesting data points. Obviously, it's going to get decided in a court of law eventually. But there is one more thing, and that was her description of what happened during the shooting.
From my point of view, I could not tell exactly what was going on, but it just looked as if he was trying to pull him almost into the car.
Who pulled? The officer pulled Michael into the car.
It just looked like he was trying to do such, and you know, Brown being a bigger fella, that didn't seem to have been working, so of course he got away, and it just seemed to have upset the officer.
And then what happened?
Got out his van and just started chasing after the boy. I'm hearing shots fired. Clearly none of them hit him, but one I think did graze him, as they say on the autopsy report. And at the end, he just turned around after, I'm guessing, he felt the bullet graze his arm. He turned around and then was shot multiple times. And
the autopsy is now showing that he was shot from the front, not the back.
Exactly.
Does that square with what you saw?
Definitely, because he was running away. So when he turned towards the cop is when he let off the most shots.
So now, the things that are still in dispute, if I'm a juror and I just heard that testimony, I would think, well, it's unclear if Michael Brown was getting pulled into the cop car by the cop or he was aggressively going in. And she says there that she wasn't sure about it, right? Whether he got grazed by a bullet when he was still running away is totally unclear because the autopsy report says that all the shots entered from the front, okay? So whether he was grazed or not, that's hard to tell you. Again, you'd have to look at his clothes. Maybe his clothes got grazed. We don't know about that. But one thing that this does seem clear from that witness, at least, is that at that point when the kid actually got shot, or the man, depending on what you want to call him, he's 18 years old, okay? When Michael Brown got shot, he was clearly a distance away from the cops and had obviously turned around. And at the time that he was turned around, that's when he shot 6 to 8 times, including twice in the head. That's pretty compelling evidence for the moment being, at least through that witness and many other witnesses that we've seen. That does not help the police officer's side of the story. Now, a lot of people say, well, look, why would the cops shoot him for nothing? So he shouldn't be arrested yet until we get all the evidence. Well, the family now says, well, what does it take to arrest someone based on the evidence that we already have, which is, according to them, and according to a lot of objective people, fairly overwhelming now, with 2 bullets to the head that from a distance doesn't appear to have been necessary. Again, whether he's guilty or not will be adjudicated in court, but we see what we see in terms of the autopsy report and now a lot of the witness testimony. Okay, let's just flip it and see if you agree. A young black man shoots a cop 6 to 8 times and puts 2 bullets in his head. Do you think the cops go, well, look, let's just take our time here and let's take a couple of weeks to investigate. We don't want to be unfair to the assailant here. Maybe he was just defending himself from the police officer, so we're not going to arrest him yet. Does anyone believe that that's how it would go down? Now you can say, hey, well, look, that's not fair because the cop's job is to protect us, so you assume that he was in the middle of protecting us. Okay, fine, take the cop element out of it. Really, you think a young black guy shoots a white guy 8 times, 6 to 8 times, puts 2 bullets in his head, and they take 2 weeks to figure out whether they should arrest him? I mean, even though, according to the cops, he might be 30 to 35 feet away when he shoots a guy, maybe it was self-defense. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and not even arrest him. I guess you could believe that, but you're really stretching at this point. And you got to think about why you're stretching to make sure that you defend the cops.